Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, playing with distress spray stains. 3 to be exact. And what was supposed to only be a couple cards turned into a dozen. So I picked out 3 spray stains from my stash. I have the new Salvaged Patina, and then Scattered Straw and Seedless Preserves. And for my first backgrounds, I am spraying them directly over a new stencil. This is part of Waffle Flower's May release. This is the Butterfly background stencil. So for my first background, I had just laid the stencil over some watercolor paper, sprayed the sprays, carefully lifted the stencil directly up, and then flipped it over and pressed it onto a new piece of watercolor paper. And then I'm pressing some paper towel over that stencil so it soaks up the ink that starts getting pushed out into the open areas. So it's a fun way to get a 2-for-1 background using sprays and a stencil. And I have paper towel in my splat box as well. This is actually bamboo paper towel. I mentioned this in a recent video. I forget when. But I picked up a few rolls of bamboo paper towel from one of the local stores when I was getting groceries. So it's like sustainable and all that, which is really cool. So that I don't feel so guilty about using it in my splat box. So anywho, this is technique basically number 1. Really, really simple. It's another one of those things where you just need to kind of experiment and see what works. This was the first one, of course, I did. And then I kind of went easier. It's like I did the hardest technique first and then went to the easiest. So for my second backgrounds, I, again, watercolor paper, sprayed it with water, and then just sprayed the sprays and just seeing where it's going to go. Like, you know, letting the colors move. These are kind of a really perfect example of how I've mentioned in other videos how certain colors, I call them just powerful colors. The Seedless Preserves Distress Spray Stain is exactly what I'm talking about. It is so intense that it just, if you're not careful, it will just take over everything. So again, this is where the experimenting comes in, seeing, you know, color combos, what works, different types of cardstocks and watercolor papers, that sort of thing. For all of my backgrounds, I'm just using Canson XL watercolor paper because I have tons of it and it's cheap and I like playing with it. With my sprays, I've been finding it works really well, so I keep experimenting with it. So I just kept moving the paper around to, you know, get those like drippy, draggy effects. And then I partially dried it with my heat tool. Not fully, but it was more just to keep it, you know, because it was starting to curl really bad. So I could just flatten out a little bit and then set it aside to dry. I'm going to show in a little bit here how I deal with pieces, though, that are really warped from, you know, the water and sprays. So I did that, and then I repeated the process for another piece, doing the exact same thing, getting a completely different look, because, you know, moving it around, how you spray it, all that sort of a thing. And this, like, doing things like this is why I put paper towel in my splat box, because you just end up with a lot of liquid, like a lot of liquid from the sprays, a lot of water, and it'll start just getting everywhere. Like, so you need something to absorb. An old towel works great too. So, yeah, whatever works. For the next set of backgrounds, watercolor paper again, this time lightly taped to a hardboard. And then I poured some of the sprays just into I have this little porcelain palette. I've had this thing for years. I don't even know where I got it. But I poured some of the distress spray stains into that palette. I wet my watercolor paper down. I'm just using a wide Royal and Langnickel brush here. And then I'm picking up the stains with the brush and then just painting a simple gradient. That's it. Very simple. No craziness, nothing. It's interesting with using the stains how, like, they'll blend and make new colors, but they also just kind of maintain their own color integrity as well. Like, I like how the Scattered Straw just kind of made some little stripey effects into the Salvaged Patina. So, like I keep saying, experiment. It's interesting. And this is why this turned into a dozen cards. Because as I'm doing like one background, I was like, I could do this. I wonder what this would do. You know, and I just kept going. So I did it again. Watercolor paper on a hardboard. This time the watercolor paper is dry. I didn't get it wet. And I'm just using a larger round brush, picking up the stains and just kind of doing a swooshy, you know, free-flowing little background. I also picked up the stains in a little bit of water and did a bit of splattering, as one does, while everything was still wet. So the splatters, again, they still kind of remained as splatters. Like, they didn't just immediately blend into the colors. And yet they kind of moved around and did their thing. So I did those backgrounds. And then again, started to speed up the process a little bit with my heat tool just to dry things. Just again, more so to speed things up, but also because, as always, I'm always running out of room. So I wanted to make sure things weren't completely soaking wet on the off chance, you know, I knock things over, that sort of thing. So I did that. And then this time I set my splat box up vertically and my watercolor paper, got my watercolor paper wet, and then sprayed the sprays in stripes and let them just run down the watercolor paper. Tim Holtz has shown this a lot of times in his videos. Again, if you don't watch Tim Holtz videos, highly recommend, especially when working with distressed products, because he explains all the reasonings, all the, you know, info that you need to know when working with these products. And then just tons of inspiration, not just like techniques he does, but then he'll show makes by people that design for him, you know, all that stuff. So I've seen him do that in videos and I was like, I want to try that. So I did. So I did that. And then my final backgrounds were just spraying the sprays onto dry watercolor paper. So there's no water ahead of time. So this is where you get the splattery spray look, depending on how much you use. Because obviously you can just keep spraying and it just ends up being solid color. So these ones were fun. And it's funny how this is not something I normally do. And yet these ended up being some of my favorites. Although I think I just love them all. This color combo also was quite fun. I was worried that the scattered straw and the seedless preserves would make mud. Which people have asked me, like, what exactly is mud? It looks like mud. Like, certain colors and certain color combos will just start mixing and it starts, you know, turning into kind of a gray-brown sludge color. That's mud. Sometimes I don't mind it. You know, a little bit here and there. I'm sure there's a little bits of mud color in these backgrounds. I'm okay with it. It's just you don't want it, you know, overtaking everything. So, but regardless, these colors just worked. And these backgrounds were so fun. And it just, I could have just done the backgrounds and only made a couple cards. But then, you know, I had new products to use. Ideas were going. Couldn't resist. So, all these backgrounds, once they were mostly dry, they're not completely dry. I thought they were, but they weren't. One way to flatten them out is to use like a laminator, or here I'm just using my little mini Mink machine. And I have it on the highest setting. I don't think it really matters that it be this hot. But I'm putting my background with a couple pieces of just scrap copy paper that I cut down. And then I put it in the carrier sheet and I run it through my machine, and the heat and the rollers just flatten it right out. You could use a regular laminator for this. Another option would be to sandwich your pieces between copy paper, just like I'm doing here. But rather than run it through a laminator, if you don't have one, run it through your die cut machine, just without a wafer die. Or with a wafer die if you're going to die cut it. That's the other thing about like experimenting with backgrounds like this. Even if you don't necessarily like how the backgrounds turned out, like as backgrounds, you could die cut them, you know, or cut out the pieces you like and use those on a card, you know, that sort of thing. But if they're really, really warped, those are options. You could use a Mink, a laminator, run it through your die cut machine. I highly recommend the copy paper just because, again, if the backgrounds aren't completely dry, the copy paper keeps the ink from just getting all over the place. But also the copy paper, if you're running it through your die cut machine, will help prevent any marks from your cutting plates getting pressed into the cardstock as well. And then if you have the time, rather than these methods, you could just stack them between layers of copy paper and then put them under a heavy, you know, stack of books or something just flat and heavy. That would work as well. So all my backgrounds have been flattened. They're dry. And then I pulled out some Gina K. This is the Iridescent Glitz Glitter Gel. I've had this for a long time. I've shown this in a ton of videos, especially with glitter paste. I use a piece of press and seal cling wrap to seal my jars of glitter paste and a lot of my other pastes and whatnot. it makes a massive difference in preventing these from drying out, because glitter paste especially, it's just the nature of the product. They just evaporate and dry out. And with glitter paste, there's no reviving them once they're completely dried out. Like, it's like a hard brick. So, press and seal. Wonderful. I do link to it because Simon Says Stamp actually carries it. I've had people ask because depending on where you're located, the stuff is not the easiest to come by sometimes. So, they do carry it for international customers and whatnot. And yeah, highly recommend. So I used that stencil with the butterfly background stencil with the paste. I immediately washed off my palette knife and my stencil because, again, glitter paste, it turns into cement. So clean your tools, stick them in a dish of water. I just washed them immediately. And then I reapply I use the same press and seal for my containers. I don't ever get rid of it. I just keep it there. So I sealed up the container really well, put the lid back on. It'll be good to go for the next time I use it. So I let those backgrounds dry, and I've cut down all of my backgrounds. 2 of them I cut a little bit larger, but all the remaining ones I die cut with one of Waffle Flower's additional A2 layers wafer dies. So they're all just a uniform size for all my card friends. And this was fun. Seriously, I highly recommend just picking a few sprays or a few inks, whatever you want to do, and just experiment. Just create some backgrounds, see where things go. So to make all mine into cards, like I've mentioned, I'm using some of the new Waffle Flower May release products. There was just so many great things in this release. Lots of butterflies, which just made me really happy. So I started with the Outline Butterflies Panel wafer die. And this is A2 sized, and I die cut it from some heavyweight white cardstock. And I die cut 2 layers each, and I'm just adhering them together with some craft tacky glue just to give it a little bit more dimension. This would work really well as a shaker card too, because the frame of it, like the outer perimeter frame, is wide enough to make it easy to apply some foam tape. And then you could make a cute little shaker card. I kept things simple because I had a lot going on. I just use little dabs of the craft tacky glue. It doesn't take much. So I adhere the 2 of the frames together, and then I adhere them to one of the backgrounds. And then this wafer die is the Flying Butterflies wafer die. Again, love. I stacked 2 layers of white cardstock die cuts together. And then I die cut my all-time favorite, Tonic's Gold Satin Pearl cardstock. And I topped these with that because it is beautiful. I already said this. In fact, I think in just my most recent video before this, if they ever try to, discontinue that cardstock, they will hear from me. I have backups, but I still need to order, again, a ton of packs. Anyway, so that was those ones. For some of my sentiments, I am using the Label Makers Sentiment Stamp Set. This set is 1 stamp. 1 great big stamp. And what I found worked best is I used it in my Misty. I inked up the stamp with VersaFine Claire Nocturne ink. I'm stamping it onto Simon's smooth 120-pound cardstock. And when I pull up the lid of the Misty, the cardstock just sticks to the stamp because it's so big. But that was perfect because then I took my little brayer and I went over this from the back with the brayer to get like everything inked up. You can't really see it on camera, but it's not like a perfect inked image. And you can see it a little bit better when it's dry. It's a little tiny, the teensiest bit blotchy, but that just kind of works with these sentiments. So with this set, there is a coordinating wafer die. Highly recommend getting the wafer die with stamps because it just makes life so much easier. Because you just line up that 1 wafer die, and then you're gonna have a ton of sentiments. So I did that, and then off camera, I had gold heat embossed sentiments from the new Thank You stamp set, which I like, immediate favorite. I never have enough thank you cards. My favorite cards to make. So I had gold heat embossed those sentiments onto black cardstock, and then I die cut them with the coordinating dies. And those Label Maker sentiments, I had stamped, like while I had everything out, I had stamped and then die cut multiples of, and then I'm just sticking them in this little like pinch bowl. They're meant for, spices and stuff, but I keep a bunch in my office. So then I've literally got like a handful of sentiments that I can like dig through and use for whatever occasion. So I set all those aside because I want to do the insides of my cards. So like I always do when I'm doing multiples, and I show this, it's mass production method. Like I did all the backgrounds at once, you know, playing with the sprays and inking up. I did all my sentiments at once. I did all my die cutting at once. I'm doing all the insides now at once. It makes things so much more streamlined and so much quicker. So for the insides, I kept it simple. I'm using that butterfly background stencil again because it's beautiful and I love it. And it was perfect. And all I'm doing is I had it taped down, and my card base, which is more of Simon's 120 pound white cardstock, just lightly taped to my work surface to keep it from moving around. And then I'm using the same color inks as the sprays. So I'm using SALVAGED PATINA. That's the new color that was released just a couple weeks ago that, oh, love. I've used it in pretty much every video I've done since this color came out. So I use the SALVAGED PATINA, Scattered Straw, and Seedless Preserves Distress Inks with my little Studio Cadia blender brushes. So I have a brush for each color, and I'm just lightly blending over the stencil. I'm not like heavily inking up the brush and heavily inking, especially because like the Seedless Preserves would be solid dark color, but just a light blend over the stencil, just, you know, give the insides of the cards some color and the little butterflies. So after all the insides were done, I'm now starting to assemble all the card fronts. I'm not going to show in the video every single card front because it's kind of redundant. It's basically the same process, just different wafer dies, etc. But for a lot of the sentiments, these big thank you ones, I die cut several just scraps of black cardstock with the wafer dies, and then I'm stacking those together with craft tacky glue to give it a bit of dimension, and then adhering them to my card fronts with the craft tacky glue. I have a bunch of gold satin pearl butterflies from die cutting that Flying Butterflies wafer die because it die cuts the outline, but then all the centers were left. So I kept all of those, and then I was just using them as kind of embellishments on some of the cards, as well as a couple of the cards that actually ended up kind of being like the focal point is some of those butterflies. And then the other ones I'm just going to save because I have, like, of course, a bunch of white ones, etc. So I'll just save for future projects. And then for dimension for some of the card fronts, I just had, again, just large scraps of heavyweight white cardstock that I adhered a couple layers together with craft tacky glue, and then adhered this behind the card front before adhering to the card base. So it's just a easy way to get some dimension. I will say, I still love using like foam tape for dimension. Just depends on, you know, whatever floats your boat. Using cardstock will add weight to your card, so sometimes that will require extra postage. So it just depends on my mood. I don't mind paying the extra postage when I'm mailing out cards, but I just thought I would note that it does add more weight versus just using like foam tape, or if you want to do like the craft foam and glue, which I don't hardly ever do just because I don't have much craft foam on hand. And me and craft foam just don't get along. But anywho, I did that with a bunch of the cards. For a couple of these cards, I'm using, this is the Circle Butterfly Shaker Wafer Die. There's actually an outline that comes with this, and you can make a shaker with it. I didn't do that. I used just the like fancy butterfly circle portion and did the same thing as the previous wafer die cut. So I die cut 2 layers from white and then the top layer from the gold satin pearl and adhered them together. And then I'm just going to adhere these directly to the backgrounds. And then adding these label maker sentiments. These I'm going to pop up with just a little bit of foam squares so they adhere easily over top of this dimensional butterfly frame. So I'm going to adhere those sentiments into place. And then on the insides of all the cards, I ended up using like companion sentiments. So either from the label maker sentiments or from that thank you sentiment stamp set that I had also gold heat embossed, and I will show that like close to the end of the video. And then as a final bit of embellishment, I have these gold satin baubles from Trinity Stamps. They match the gold satin pearl cardstock, which was just a happy little coincidence and meant that I had to use them on all the cards. So I just adhered them into place with dabs of craft tacky glue, just using my little embellishment wand. So I adhered that to all the card fronts. Yeah, I'm almost all the card fronts, if not all of them. I'm pretty sure I did every single card front with these. Yes, I did. yes, we're good. So that finished off all of these cards. And I didn't realize until I got to it on the top, the thank you card on the top right, the glue wasn't like set on those baubles, so they smeared on the butterflies. I fixed that. I wiped off the glue because it was sat in cardstock, so I was able to wipe off the glue and reposition those baubles, so they'll be good. They're good. But these are all the cards and the insides. So a dozen backgrounds turned into a dozen cards. And because this is part of a new release, this video is part of a blog hop. I will have that info on my blog, which is linked directly below the video. So I'll have a link to my blog post. I'll have info about the blog hop, all that kind of stuff. Check out my blog post in the description box below the video. I'll link to all the supplies I used. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping, commenting, all of it. I appreciate it so very much. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!